identifying unique business opportunities by forecasting the impact of new technologies and applying that knowledge to create revenue-generating companies, products, and systems. Without further ado, Bratton.
Thank you. Make sure we're all wired here. Well, I appreciate everybody coming over. Hopefully the after-lunch narcosis doesn't set in for a few minutes, so thanks for making it over. I'm here to share some of the things that I've been able to learn about both the technology side and the business side of what does it take to make successful apps and what does that mean. And let me give you the Cliff Note version of everything right now. It really boils down to understanding and making sure you're building the right apps for an audience you understand, delivering something of value to them that is very targeted, and ruggedizing the heck out of the app because it's a rough, real world out there, and mobile is way different than web. And that's really what we're going to talk about, how to get those points really wrapped up together. So let's start off with a little bit of an introduction to mobile and the way it really fits into most of our minds today. So we're often looking at mobile, especially on the enterprise side, as that mysterious thing. What the heck does enterprise mobility even mean, and why do I care? Especially folks who are still students. What's an enterprise? This isn't about boring enterprise IT. This is about how do we go change people's lives with mobile apps? What does that mean? And this isn't somebody who had a laptop like 50% of the folks in this room currently set out. This is about people who are working with clipboards. How do we go change what they're doing and give them capabilities they've never had before? So let me start with a little bit of background on who the heck I am and kind of how I got here. I'm a graduate from back in '93 and was overly involved with ACM. I was hoping to do a little bit of research here as we kind of start off. So the first question is, how many folks are currently ACM members in the room? So for those of you who aren't, I highly encourage you to. As an employer, that's something I always look for is how is somebody going above and beyond, and especially on the ACM side, there are so many cool projects that are underway in that organization, and whether it's SIG Mobile on the mobile side of things or many other different groups, absolutely get involved. And if you are involved, make sure you're working on projects. It really does set you apart, and it really helps build up that knowledge way beyond a lot of the classwork. So I've been helping folks as kind of I'm a half geek, half entrepreneur, have been for a long time. I founded 10 companies, and I've been helping mentor people in the business community and really trying to grow the Midwest as a thriving technology playground, if you will, where we can start these companies and do really interesting things. I'm currently on the advisory board of the computer science department here, so if anybody has any concerns or otherwise you'd like me to share with Rob and other folks in the department, I'm happy to do that, please. Also recently, we actually rolled out the Northern Illinois University LexTech, one of my company's, mobile curriculum, a 5-class series that's actually leading toward a certificate program. So I'm a huge believer that public and private partnership is necessary because we've got to start embracing mobile at a way deeper level. The world is behind. The devices are out there, and we don't know what to do with them yet half the time. So we've really got to start training people to be more effective with these things. Also done a fair amount of where I am right now. I get to do a lot of public speaking, evangelizing, writing about mobile, what the heck we should do with it, and I really enjoy that. I'm also the chairman of the Illinois Technology Association's Mobile Visionary Roundtable, again, bringing together mobile leaders in Illinois to talk about what's next. How do we address those things? Now, in terms of where I am today kind of in the business world and where some of this experience that you're going to see comes from, I'm currently the founder and chief geek of 3 companies. The first, LexTech Global Services, we're focused on building apps for the enterprise. So that's typically larger companies, but it's not how do I take a web thing and just squish it into a phone. How do I deliver an app that's never been seen before and that somebody never even thought of, that doesn't work on the web but it works on mobile? LexTech Labs, and we'll come back to a little demo on this one, is focused around delivering mobile video surveillance to mobile platforms. So high-end video being used by Department of Justice agencies, stuff like that. And then recently this year just launched Serious Apps, a company to try to make linking mobile to back-end really old crusty systems easier, and a lot of tools to do that. Now as a part of that, I've had a chance to work with some really great people on our teams, and we've won a lot of really interesting awards. The one on the lower left there I'm really proud of. We won an Edison Innovation Award. Now, as a geek, that's awesome. I love it. But it was about how we applied technology to a real-world problem. Another one of the awards, the Chicago Innovation Award, I had a chance to actually open the NASDAQ last year. That was really cool. But it's because of how we used technology to solve problems. It wasn't just about lunch in a company or something. It was, how do we go affect something in the real world? So that's going to be my challenge to you guys is, how do we start attacking these real issues out there and not build the next check-in app? We don't need that yet. We need to start solving real problems. So in terms of the 5 secrets we're going to run through today, the first thing that we're going to do is really look at what is the mobile landscape. What do I need to be looking at from not only a platform perspective, but what are people doing with mobile? Then we're going to move into talking a little bit about a process around mobile. And this is way more than just sitting down and coding. And we'll talk about that. Then I've got 10 questions for you to really help you think through, is this the right app? And if it is, how do I actually move it forward successfully? And let's take a look at how people are being successful out there in the stories that you're not hearing about in the news. How are people using mobile in the real world? And then finally, 10 ideas of if you see any of these specific indicators, there should be an app for that. So lots of different things in here. If I'm going too fast through anything or you've got questions as we're going through, please feel free to fire away. I'm here to help you. So if you've got questions, ideas, other stuff you want to do to make sure we address, just throw it in and we'll take care of it right then. So first, let's take a look at the landscape. And to understand that, I really want to take a second to look at how did we get here? So back in the old days, I don't know how many folks in the room will actually recognize this, we had the mainframe, the big beastie computer. And it was focused on keeping business functionality, providing it for the first time really, but only a couple people had access to it. Only a couple special people in the company did. Then client server came along, and we were able to take that business functionality and roll it out to more people, but inside the organization. It wasn't really touching the outside world, it was inside the organization. And then the wonder of the internet and the web. And for the first time, we really exposed that business functionality to people outside the organization, but they still had to be at their desk. And a vast majority of people in the world aren't at a desk, which is exactly where mobile comes in. We're now able to take the stuff that's been around for a long time, a lot of that back-end data, a lot of that back-end processing that we do, but give it to a new group of people who've never had a computer or never had access to it. And that's the really exciting part. This is a brand new set of users, not necessarily users we have to train. So we're able to skip generations of technology and generations of thought around things. So, we've gotten into the mobile era, but let's talk about how we got here from a speed perspective. And we're going to do that using some of the Apple products to kind of put things in context. First, we had the iPod introduction a couple years back. And the iPod introduction, so this is a graph showing how did it roll out into the marketplace. And as you can see across the bottom, that's the quarters after launch. And that's a pretty respectable hockey stick for a consumer electronic product. Everybody had heard of the iPod, became the ubiquitous music player, dominated the marketplace. Well, let's layer on top of that the launch of the iPhone. And we now start to see that the iPhone itself came into the market 2 to 3 times faster than the iPod did. Now that's breaking some of the technology laws that we would typically expect to see in terms of the rate of adoption. It's getting faster. Now let's put the iPad on top of it. Even faster. This is the fastest technology adoption curve we've ever seen as humans. The mobile technology adoption by society has finally hit the tipping point where we, the users, are ready for it and are demanding it. And that we goes beyond we, the geeks, to we, the everybody. That's really important because, again, this is a group that hasn't had computers before. This can be my mom, it could be my grandmother. They're using mobile devices. They haven't had the ability to get into the technology that we've embraced through all of our lives, but they're there now. So let's look at this in another context as well. A couple other product introductions. So there's the original BlackBerry as it rolled out many years ago. There's the Apple iPod we just looked at. But let's put on top of that some of those gaming devices, especially the Nintendo DS and the Wii that nobody could get for Christmas when those came out, and then the iPhone. We continue to see a progression of faster and faster adoption of this technology. Yes, there's been a lot of technology since then. We've got future generations of the iPhone. We've got Android. We've got Windows Mobile coming in. We'll see what that spike looks like. We're getting faster and faster. So what that tells us is it's out there. It has hit critical mass. And this is the next marketplace that everyone in technology should be looking at. Bar none. This is it. And it's proven itself by people voting with their own dollars. So we really need to pay attention to mobile because people are demanding the functionality. We're all carrying the devices. So now it's time for other quick impromptu poll. We did this at breakfast for the alumni breakfast, and I'm very interested in seeing it. So get them out. So how many iPhones are in the room? All right, I'm going to call that maybe a third. Android devices? 40 to 50% on top of that. Windows Mobile? 1. BlackBerry? Another. And I'm going to say other. Okay? And we've got a few others in there. So one thing that tells us, and we're going to jump into other things here, it's a multi-platform world. No matter what our preference is, we have to deal with the reality of there's multiple. But when we're looking at that multiple platform side of things, we have to be able to see through the BS that is often provided by the press and analysts as to what's really happening in the marketplace. Because the analysts will do what we just did in this room and say, you know what, that's the state of mobility today. And they're wrong. So let's look at this as one particular example. So this is some information from Nielsen. This is something that they published, I think they published this in February, so it was numbers accurate through January. And where this was really interesting is if you boil it all the way down to the bottom, what this was telling us was that Android was ahead of iPhone at the time, 29% to 27%, and was ahead of BlackBerry, 27%. Now those are interesting numbers, but they're based on a sample size of 14,000 people. Now at that time, if we looked at the numbers in the marketplace, it was a physical impossibility for this to actually be the usage base of what was going on. And let's talk about why. So the next set of numbers, and these are as current as we can get them, this is something we spend a lot of time on combing through quarterly reports because we don't believe the analysts, is, well, what's really out there? What's the state of the industry? So as we've just heard from Apple in their announcement this week, there are 250 million iOS devices out there. And that's something else that we need to start clarifying. These are no longer phones. These are our mobile computers. So when we're talking iOS, it means the iPhone, the iPad, the iPod Touch, because we have to look at all of them because that's where the apps are running. We were having a debate earlier today on whether this is going to include the TV spectrum in the future as well, but let's just stick to the mobile devices for the moment. So if we look at Apple, we've got 250 million of these devices out there. Now from a hand-me-down factor, most of those are still in active use. They haven't been put aside. Unlike the BlackBerry, which has 163 million devices sold and about 60 million active subscribers. So it's about a 1/3 still in use number. Then we get to the Android 180 million, which is again at this point still mostly in use. So we've got two very strong platforms. Windows Mobile is going to make its way into this. We'll see what other operating systems do. But when we're looking at our applications, we have to really pay attention to who are our users? What are they likely using? It's a multi-platform world solidly. And if we take a look at actually number of devices sold, iOS is actually still ahead of Android. If we talk about how many were sold last month, that's a market share number. And that's something to pay attention to. But if I'm selling an app today that has a lifespan of 6 to 12 months, these are numbers I've got to know. So pay attention to what the real numbers are, not necessarily what you see from those analysts. Let's talk a little bit about a process. Developing mobile apps and what that means. And let's combine thinking about the app with actually the technology side. So that process really breaks down into 4 pieces. The strategy side of things, what are we doing and why? Ideation, fancy word for design. Development, and let's talk technical architecture when we get in there. And long-term support, because I can't just fire the app out there and forget about it. I'm going to have to touch it again. So let's touch on each one of those. So first, on the strategy side of things, the simple summary here is think before you app. Who am I trying to address a problem for? What is their problem? And why do they care? If I can't clearly articulate those things and streamline the focus of what I'm trying to do down to 1, 2, maybe 3 specific key features, my app's too big. Mobile apps are very different. They have to be incredibly focused. We can't take a desktop experience and squish it into the phone. You get about 5% of the desktop experience in the phone. So general rule of thumb is, what's the one thing my app should do? And leave it there. So Strategy also implies, what are the right apps I should be working on? Now let me give you an example of an organization that we worked with. They identified that people in the field using clipboards, they were doing data entry, and because they weren't getting everything that they needed to, the company was underbilling for about $5 million worth of services that it was providing. $5 million, that's a huge problem. So that app went forward because it had a great ROI. That was building the wrong app for the right reason. Because once we started looking at the strategy of that company and what they were trying to do, they were actually trying to grow by $1 billion a year by acquiring other companies. The apps that they actually needed are ones that make it easier to bring a new company in and let those people get up to speed faster, not necessarily to go solve the $5 million problem. So that was the wrong app for the right reason. So ask yourself when you're looking at a particular app, why? Is this really the right app for this marketplace? Does it solve the problem I think it does? Or is there a different issue that we should actually be focusing on? Next, let's talk about design, ideation. And this really boils down to understanding everything that an app is going to do before you start writing the code. And I understand that that may be the opposite approach that many of us on the technology side like to take. We like to dive in, start working on it, kind of see what comes out of it. And that is, unfortunately, a path to unsuccessful apps. Because if you're defining it yourself, you can be successful doing that. If you're doing this app working as a part of a group or for someone else, you're not going to end up with the right app. You're not going to hit the needs of the people that you're talking to. So the process that we recommend that folks really take a look at first is, what's the simple flow through the app? So, old-fashioned flow chart. What is the flow from screen to screen to screen? And what are the actions that a user can take between those? Again, it sounds common sense and simple, but without this, a non-technical user may not have any understanding of how they're going to navigate the app. So, very simple. What are the screens? What are the actions between them? And this is something that could take 10 minutes to put it together, but I guarantee the first time you look at it, especially with the potential end user, they're going to say, well, how do I do this? Where's this feature? And it gives you a great place to have a dialogue related to it. Now, once you've got nailed down at a high level, what are the screens and what it's supposed to do, the next piece is to avoid Photoshop. You don't go there next. And that's where people really get hosed. You have to focus on usability. How do I keep this app easy? Because if it's not easy, it's going to get run once. It doesn't matter what it looks like if it's easy. So the first step is something called wireframing, line drawing. For each of the screens, what the heck goes on the screen, and how do I navigate it? Then everybody can, again, agree, yep, those are the fields that show up on that screen. That's how we should address that issue. Now what do we do to move on? I'm a big believer in interactive prototyping. So before you write any actual code, set it up in such a way that somebody can touch the wireframes. So this is an example of a prototyping tool we created on the iPad. Just load a bunch of JPEGs in, hotspots, and it's just flipping between JPEGs. But this immediately communicates to somebody what the heck the app does. What happens when I hit that button? What happens when I move things around? So interactive prototyping, if anybody's interested in that tool, it's Prototap. This is really critical to applications, and there's lots of different tools for doing these kinds of things. I highly recommend this in the web world. It is a requirement for mobile apps. You have to show somebody who's the potential end user, here's exactly what it's going to look like from a flow perspective. And one of the critical reasons is that Apple has taught us all to use touch devices. We're only 3 to 4 years into understanding how that even works. But the act of touching something and the haptic interface concept of touching something is completely different than moving a mouse to move a cursor to click on something on the screen. We have to learn how to do that because it doesn't make any sense. The 2-year-old can pick this up and touch something and drag things around because it makes sense. That means interface design is different. We have to spend time during the ideation stage to get those differences really hammered out. If this thing still looks like a website when we're in the ideation phase and trying to talk about how someone's going to navigate it, we probably did something wrong. So we need to take that and work through the interactive prototype to see how did it really work. And then make it look great. But at the same time, continue to validate. And this is, again, that same tool with just touchable graphics. No code's been written yet. Understand how this sucker is going to work. Now, from a developer perspective, the part that I love about this is now I have actually an example of here's exactly what it's supposed to do. Not that I was given pseudocode. I've got the visuals and, okay, hit this button, it's going to slide this way, it's going to work this way. That's a whole lot easier than trying to read a spec doc that's this thick. It's a visual definition of the app. So this goes a long way to making our lives easier in understanding what we need to do. All right, let's talk code. Diving into the technical side of things. The number one thing that we have to do on mobile apps that is very, very different than web apps is pay attention to a constrained, dangerous, rough environment. We're dealing with a memory-constrained device here, and the number one mistake I see every early developer on mobile run with, unless they've come from an embedded software world, is not paying attention to memory. You're guaranteed to run out of memory on this thing unless you've got 3 things on the screen and that's all you ever do. You've got to look at your allocates, your releases, paying attention to how you're doing that, watching for the memory leaks. And from a performance perspective, same kind of thing. These aren't desktop computers and we can't treat them that way. So we have to really pay attention to that. We've also got to pay attention to all of the exception cases that come in. I get a phone call. I get a text message. Something happens in the app that on the web side of things, I don't have to handle exceptions from a user interface perspective typically. If somebody closed the web browser, the web app's gone for the most part. On the app, somebody jumped out of the app, well, it's supposed to do something. It's supposed to do something intelligently. If I was checking my bank balance and I jump out to check my email and I come back into the bank app, what should it do? Should my balance still be on the screen? Should it force me to log in? Should it restart the whole transaction I was doing? We've got to think about that. So it's very, very different. And we've got to code accordingly. At what point do I store my state? At what point do I need to store what the user was in the middle of? What do I encrypt? A lot of pieces to it. Now the other piece, what do I do when there's no connectivity? Connectivity is a huge issue out there, and as much as we all want to think that, you know what, it's going to be solved in the next year or two, it's not. It's just not. So if I'm dealing with an app that's doing data collection, and especially something that's talking to a back-end system, what do I do when there's nothing there? So we have to do a lot of more advanced types of things in terms of storing that data and forwarding it when I do have connectivity. Caching locally, another great example. If I'm out, we'll talk about an example in a few minutes, but I'm out somewhere with no connectivity, but I still need access to 50,000 data records because I do a lot of searches. And you know what? Those searches have to be really fast. I can't handle 2, 3, 4 second latency here over a cell network to a back end and back because the user experience isn't going to be there. Well, does that mean I should cache 50,000 data elements in the device? Probably. But I've got to design it intentionally that way in the first place. That doesn't happen by accident. Just firing up a screen and calling a web service, that's easy. Firing up a screen and having the data for me the second that it appears, that's hard. So we've got to design it differently. Once you've gone through that basic tech design to understand what it's going to look like, the other piece to things is getting something in the hands of the end user as fast as possible. Because it's a touch-based interface, I've often seen that the app doesn't sink in until they can touch it. And it's when they can touch it for the first time they ask the question, why is it red instead of blue? Well, because that's what you asked for. Well, it's not real until they can touch it. So getting those things out there as soon as possible is really important. And then the last stage, and this is the one that, again, most of us don't want to think a whole lot about, which is long-term support. What happens after I've released that app? If, there's a bug. There's going to be a bug. There's going to be a couple of bugs. There's going to be an OS update that breaks it completely. What are you going to do then? So if it's a business, if this is your business writing apps, you need to at least have a plan of, okay, when that OS update is going to come out, am I testing all of my apps ahead of time? Am I waiting until the user reports a problem? If I have bug fixes, how am I going to push all of my updates out simultaneously if I've got lots of apps? So again, not something you have to do a lot of super advanced work on, but you've got to think about it. You don't want to wait till the last minute and say, oh, crud, we forgot about that. So make sure you include the thinking about those future versions into your process. So now let's talk about 10 specific questions to understand if it's the right app and how you're moving forward with it. So the first one is identifying the right app. So if you're talking to an organization or you're looking at a system right in front of you, is there a specific feature in that system that people use a lot? that would make sense to put in a mobile context. This is a great way to identify apps that should be built. There's tons of great web systems out there. You don't want to take the 1,000 features that are in the website. What's the one feature that people use all the time? Using the bank example, I want to look up on balance. Great. The balance lookup app. That makes a lot of sense. I probably don't need to apply for a new credit card online using that app. So what one feature makes sense out of that? Another place to look for opportunities is where are there no-tech workflows in an organization? And we'll talk about a specific example of that related to clipboards, but where do people not have laptops today? But especially, these are people who aren't in front of a desk. So they're not just on the phone, they're out in the field. So they're installing something, they're fixing something, they're out in a field actually working with something growing in the ground. Where are there no-tech workflows? Because there's probably information those people need. And those are great opportunities for apps that are going to help them be more successful. So back to the general strategy. So this is a little bit of that enterprise. How do businesses need to think about apps? Again, building the wrong app for the right reason is the trap if I don't know what my business is trying to do. If the goal for my business is to double our revenue in the next 3 years, well, then that's what the app should be helping you do. If the goal of our business is to, you know what, we need to cut costs by 50% in the next 3 years, then that's what the apps are supposed to be doing. Now, it's really, really easy to come up with 50 different app ideas that are applicable in an organization. It's really hard to pick the 2 that support that strategy. So if you can start pushing that discussion with the business owners, with the folks in marketing and sales of what are they trying to do, then the right apps come out of it. And that's really important. Because as you start working with organizations and building mobile apps, if that first app is the wrong app, everybody's going to have a bad experience with it. Everyone's going to say, mobile's not going to help us. You know, that's for everybody else. It doesn't apply to our industry. Well, it's because they picked the wrong app. Mobile fits just about everywhere, but only if you're doing the right apps. If you're just throwing a CRM into the hands of the whole sales force and they're like, well, you know, I've already got this and I'm in front of my computer all day, that didn't help anything. It's got to be the right apps. And once you've determined what the app is, another key is, how do we know if we were successful rolling this sucker out? What was the problem, and did we solve it or not? How can I measure it? Because if I can't put numbers to it, I can't say I was successful. Now, this is another area where we as developers can often have a challenge because we build apps for ourselves. And we really have to push ourselves to ask the question, who's the user? Who specifically is the user? I'll give you an example for an application I'll show in just a moment that details with video surveillance footage. Okay, who's the user? Does that mean that's a security guard? Or does that mean that that's a manager who's managing 15 stores who wants to kind of check in on what's going on? Those are 2 very different things. So we have to know who that user is because I'm going to have to train that user probably if I'm in an organization. And that's the person I need to talk to for feedback on, hey, are we addressing your problems? Now, this is a good one to identify where other companies, so if you've got competition out there, what are other people doing? And specifically, roll it back 2 questions. Have they talked about a success with their mobile apps? And if they did they have numbers? Did they talk about this app generated X million dollars for us? If so, well, then that's an app you have to pay attention to. If they say, hey, look at us, we've got a mobile app, they probably just wasted their money. And you probably don't want to go there. And once you've got that awesome app, how the heck are you going to get anybody to use it? This is a problem in 2 different areas. Number 1, folks look at the App Store as once I get it into the App Store, I'll sell hundreds of thousands of them and life is just great. It's not going to happen. The App Store is distribution, meaning that it'll get apps out to your users. It's not going to sell a thing. It's the same thing as getting a product into a retail store. That doesn't sell anything. You still have to market it so people know to go to the store to look for it. So how are you going to market your consumer app? Businesses have the exact same problem. I've got 10,000 employees. We just put together this awesome app that's going to make their lives easier. How do I tell them about it? So you've got to engage different people in that organization to actually help spread the word so they know to even do that, and actually the value that they can get from it. And a great way to do this inside an organization is as you're building the app, actually start to recruit evangelists, the potential end users, but the ones who are really excited about the change coming, as opposed to those that are terrified by the change coming. Because there will be those people that you're giving an app to, and they're looking at the phone like, what do I do with this? You've got to get some of those advocates into the process early so that they can help spread the word, spread the excitement, and really build out the user base. Now, another one from a technical perspective and a business perspective. What level of security do I really need? And the gut default reaction to everybody is, well, just encrypt it all. Well, what does that mean? Does that mean I have to encrypt the data transport from the mobile device to the back end? Does that mean I need to encrypt the data in the back end? Does that mean I need to encrypt the data resident on the device itself, or do I even allow that? Do I need authentication to run the app at all? And depending on what someone's doing, the answer may be no, because adding encryption and adding this kind of bulletproofing to it is expensive from an engineering perspective. So let me give you an example there. An organization that has its inventory information puts its inventory information on the mobile device so that their salespeople can look up, do we have it in stock or not? Well, that might sound proprietary until you hear that, that same exact information is available on a public-facing website that any user can get to. So who cares if anybody gets this data? We don't need to encrypt it. So understanding the data gets you there. So we talked about it. How are we going to support it? Who is the support team? And one of the unique support challenges for apps is because their functionality is really focused, the typical IT enterprise help desk doesn't know anything about that functionality. Who's going to be the support expert that if I have an app that is helping me forecast financial futures, and I'm typing in numbers and I'm getting something that doesn't make sense, who in the company is going to do that? Because the help desk isn't. So how do I actually share the knowledge and share what those people are doing across multiple support folks? And then the last one is planning ahead of time. How often do I actually need to make changes to my apps? And a typical answer for this from something that we've seen for apps that are touching anybody in the business world is I need to be updating this stuff minimum once every 2 months. And that's something that's tough for most companies to think about. They're not ready to roll out functionality and continued enhancements because they typically want updates to be big as opposed to small. So the more that we can help them understand agile and smaller iterations, the better. So let's talk about some of the exciting stuff that's actually happening out there in the world that kind of exemplifies how we're being successful with this. So this first one is an example of something I'll call visual searching, or how do I break the incredibly poor user paradigm of looking up from a list of lists of lists of lists of lists. Hierarchical hell. That's not a good fit for small screens. What can we do differently? And the example here would be, if you're looking on the left side there, the user is actually touching things on the screen and dragging them around. So this is an example of a live search where a user can touch something, drag it into the screen, and see a list, the second column, see that list dynamically updating with what fits that criteria. So let me give you an example that's maybe a little easier to understand than this particular one. Let's say we're in the car sales world. And I'm the car salesperson. I've got my iPad application. I'm going to drag, you know what? I'm talking to someone. They're interested in Fords and Chevys. I'm just dragging those criteria in. I'm not picking from lists. And I'm seeing a live inventory in front of me updating in real time. And they want something that's newer than 2008. Drag it in. This interface on the touch side of things has to be something that, number one, I can touch it, but we have to start taking advantage of drag and drop or just touch and drag in interfaces. Now, that's one of the things that makes the debate between native and HTML5 so challenging, is that HTML5, yes, it's technically doable, but it's hard and clunky. We're not there yet. For a simple lookup application, it's very doable. But to create the same rich user experience, and that's what's really demanded when you're talking about a deep, my word, serious app, is you've got to be able to touch what's on the screen and interact with it. I'm not looking things up. Question? Yes?
Do you feel that that's an issue with HTML5 itself, or is that an issue?
So the question being, yes, so repeating that question, is the challenge for HTML5 the HTML5 language itself, or is it the operating system? And I'll include into that also the development tools. And it's all of the above. So HTML5, the standard itself, yes, we can create touchable interfaces. I can drag stuff around, but it's not easy. We don't have really good, I mean, the open source libraries exist, but they're not really good. I can't get the same quality of animations from movement that I can from the native apps. The development tools themselves, again, just including that library, and if I'm manually coding that in Ajax or, JavaScript or otherwise, that's hard. It's doable, but it's hard. And I would suggest it actually makes it really difficult to maintain, especially given that I think there's going to be massive updates over the next 12 months in the tools, in the libraries, and how we build HTML5 systems. So today, it's tough today. So again, I need to be able to touch what's on the screen, and you're going to see that as a common element as we go through these. So this is an example of an application across multiple platforms. We haven't talked multi-platform yet. Multiple platforms because, again, it's at least a 2, potentially 3 or 4 platform world. And this is an example of an application, a Chicago-based company, Payflex, that allows the user, they've got a web system already, where a user can go in, they can check their health savings account or health reimbursement account. So think bank account for your health insurance dollars. And I can go in and manage all that through the website. I could have managed it with the mobile interface. But what I couldn't do was, while I was standing in the pharmacy, capture a picture of that receipt, hit a couple of buttons, submit my claim, be done, and never think about it again. So because I could do it wherever I was and use this as a sensor and start collecting data beyond just typing, it allowed them to open up their business model and their capability set to allow thousands of people to take better advantage of a system they already had. So that's another huge opportunity for you guys, is understanding what are the web systems that are already out there that exist, that by putting a mobile interface on them, it doesn't just let me type into a web page, but we can capture data that you couldn't put into the other one. Can you imagine going home and scanning receipts and uploading JPEGs in a web interface? That's not all that easy. The camera on this thing is going to be the next massive asset that we're all using in the next 12 months. What else can I take pictures of? So if it's pictures of receipts, pictures of other things that are directly tied into either personal or business processes. So that's a big one. Let's talk a little bit about the tech design of how you do the multi-platform side of things. Unfortunately, most of the multi-platform tools that are out there today, we actually have the exact same problem we had in the HTML5 debate. The tools exist, but they're not really mature enough to deliver high-quality apps yet. For the most part, I'm delivering a mediocre experience across every platform. Now, why would I want to do that? Users don't want that. They want something useful that looks great and it's easy to use. It's going to change. We're going to get better. But today, it's really hard. And whether that's the open source libraries and I'm using more WebKit kind of stuff, or if that's some of the other cross-platform development tools, we're not quite there. We're close. We're close, but we're not quite there. So if you're doing your technical design on an application like this, what I would highly recommend, and I'm hoping you guys are all familiar with UML at this point, and if you haven't taken the software engineering classes, please do, is start laying out your object models and how your flows are going to work, especially on the sequence diagrams. Abstract it. Understand all of the stuff that has to happen that you can reuse across platforms. Business logic. How's my object model going to work? And define an abstraction layer where, you know what, once I go below this, I'm going to need to look at what are my native classes for opening up that socket. How do I actually handle my navigation controller on iOS versus Android? But above that, keep it the same so you can use the same class names, make it easy to work with multiple platforms. Let me rephrase that. Easier. Because multiple platforms still requires a lot of work. Another example of an organization that's fixing a problem that they had with their sales force. CommScope they have thousands of specific products. These are connectors and cables and wires, things that are really, really bulky. In the old days, they took those to trade shows. In the slightly less old days, they had a touch screen the size of this wall that people could come in and actually touch and interact with their products. It was extremely challenging to update and didn't necessarily give all the information that they wanted. So what they did is they put their entire product catalog on iPads in an interactive form. So people were able to not only browse a catalog, but they could bring up 360-degree spin models and actually see in 3 dimensions how this product actually works, play videos of how do I install it, bring up all the PDF sheets. So they collected all of this information, not just so that I, the sales guy, can look at it, but that when you and I are sitting down at lunch or we're sitting down to communicate, I can get the information I'm looking for quickly, flip it over, and communicate with you. That's a huge value of these platforms, is that they don't sit between us like a laptop and put up a wall. They become something that really helps us communicate with each other. So in a sales perspective, whether you want to call it interactive sales brochure, this isn't, I'm going to hand it to you and say, here you go, buy something. This is, how do I help two people communicate and understand some information? If that's related to inventory, sales, products, or otherwise, what tool helps people do that? And I would suggest that we haven't even come close to touching that on the personal side yet. On the personal side, it's primarily us doing this. It's not us doing something here and talking about it together. Those aren't happening yet, but they will and they should. This is helping us communicate. The only place we ever do that is when I want to show you my pictures. We don't have a lot of other interactions like that. So how does the mobile device support two people actually talking to each other as opposed to two people typing to each other? So we'll get there. Driving real-time video really starts to open even more interesting possibilities. This is an example of an application that actually lives in the operating room. So what you're seeing in the lower left there is an image from a camera. And the problem that this is solving is that today, when implants are going in via surgery, that a company representative from that implant company has to stand in the room next to where the surgery is happening. So these folks have to fly all over the place in case there's a question about the implant. And then they can watch the instruments and otherwise. So this organization put together a solution allowing that person to, via iPad, actually over a high-speed link, look at everything that was happening in the operating room, physically control the camera and look around, look at all of the instrumentation, everything that's up on the screens, have VNC access to a PC in the operating room. So ultimate remote access to everything in there, so that person doesn't have to fly around the country constantly. Now that also means that surgeries don't have to be delayed until that person gets there. So a mobile app is improving healthcare because people can actually look at the information they need when they need it. That's what this all boils down to. What are we providing to whom that's critical to what they need? Again, I'm going to keep making fun of check-ins. Is that really critical? This is. These are the kind of apps that are changing the world. And these are the kind of apps I'm looking forward to seeing you guys putting together. Another good example in the medical space is how do we put imagery, and let me see if I can actually fire this one up here. How do we put the medical imagery into the hands of the doctor where and when they need it? So what we're looking at here is an example of, you know what, how do I take all of these, whether they're x-rays or other CAT scans and things. There's a lot of interesting data there. And let's go in here and take a look at who has a whole bunch of scans. We're going to look at Sharon. It's not a good example. That's what I get for upgrading to the pre-Golden Master. Sorry, guys. I'm not going to show that one today. Real iOS 5 comes out, that'll actually work. So, bringing the other picture back to the screen. So imagine, if you will, swiping my finger across that to actually move through 100 different slices of the patient. Now, you can do that on a desktop today. You can do that with a mouse. You can do the zooming in. But this lets me touch the x-ray. So what else does that let me do? Well, the same thing I can do with pictures. I can zoom in and out. I can rotate it. After I've zoomed it in and out, I can then shift to the next slices and really start to get a better understanding of what's going on in this patient. I'm not hanging this sucker on a wall. I'm not sitting on a computer screen using the mouse kind of looking at it. I'm interacting with the data. I'm touching the data. That's the next generation interfaces we're going to start seeing more and more of, is let me maneuver through information. And I think this is a great visual example of it. I can touch the images, and I can't prove it yet, but I suspect in the next 2 years we're really going to start hearing, as this happens more and more, that the accuracy of diagnoses goes up because people are interacting with that data in a totally different way. So this is one I'm really excited about because, again, it's changing the way things are going to work, and it's kind of a good paradigm shift shower for what should the interfaces look like. I keep talking about inventory data just because it's an easy example of there's lots of data. Well, how should I be able to search that stuff? I should be able to manipulate it in something similar. this is also going to be the year where we're going to start seeing connected hardware. Well, as we talked about, these are the mobile computing devices. What do we do with our computers today? We attach crud to them. Well, what kind of stuff? This is an example. What you're looking at on the left side here, anybody's been in an Apple store, you've seen this scanner. It's a scanner that wraps around the iPod Touch, and Apple uses their own point-of-sale system written on this thing. So the iPod Touch becomes the front-end interface to a back-end commerce system they already had. And one of the great examples, I think, of what this did to their process, they were able to take the activation of an iPhone from close to 11 minutes to 2 minutes. That's a 500x speed improvement in retail. Nobody does that. And they were able to do it, which I think is a beautiful example of the right tool with the right software and the right user interface, tightly focused in on what is somebody trying to do. They're trying to check you out really quick. If you're going to do something really advanced, they'll walk to the computer to do it. But otherwise, everybody in that store can take care of 98% of the customers. That's exactly what this is about. Now, on the right side, you're actually seeing a picture of something that we put together on that same platform. We did a simple point-of-sale system. We demonstrated it out at one of the iOS dev camps in front of about 500 folks. And we decided we wanted to try to do one better. And what we demonstrated was scanning 10 products, putting those into the system, swiping a credit card, bouncing a payment off of a back-end payment processing system with the PayPal guys, and completing the transaction. And we did it in 5.5 seconds. That's the power of mobile technology going forward. Anytime we're looking at these existing cash registers or this other clunky stuff where somebody's sitting there tapping on stuff, it's gone. We can replace it with things that makes this all work in seconds instead of minutes. And that's what you guys are going to get to do. So I'm really excited about that. So whether that's the scanner, the credit card swiper, the printer, the fingerprint reader, the iris scanner, I mean, whatever it is, there's going to be really interesting stuff hanging off these devices. Now, earlier I mentioned the Knotek environment. And let's talk about that. So, how many folks have actually seen a grain silo up close? A couple of us, good. My parents both came from Indiana, so I had the chance to spend a bunch of time out there. And the problem we're going to talk about here, we work with a group in Indiana that you can see the driver here. And I've got a video I'll show you in just a second. So let me set the scene for you. So to the left of the driver is the cab of the truck. He's hanging behind the cab looking into the trailer, corn's flowing from the silo, kicking up into his face. Now, that corn flows up to the point where it gets high enough, he jumps back in the cab, pulls forward a couple of feet, stops, gets out, and looks back into the back again. And he has to keep doing this. You can imagine the number of times people fall off doing this. It's hazardous. Stuff's kicking up in his face. Those chains you see on the left side, another person actually has to turn everything on and off, so there's two people doing the job. It's very inefficient. So imagine, if you will, mobile enabling a grain silo, which sounds insane, and then you look at what it does to the process, and it's a beautiful example of where we're going and the kind of applications we need to be looking for. Let's stop focusing on what's the web interface that already exists and start talking about how does mobile technology change a process that already happens today. So here you've got the example of a one-button push to turn a grain silo on and off. And let me show you a little bit of a video of that. Turn the music down a little bit. You can see that spout hanging down above the truck there. And I would not want to be him. That does not look like fun, having that stuff kicked up in his face. And you're going to see him now do his pirouette around into the cab. And he's got to do that a half a dozen times, 8 times for every truck going out. So this yellow box interfaces in with all the industrial equipment in that silo with a Wi-Fi network and safety precautions out to the mobile device with a camera, so the driver can actually see from inside the cab everything going on. So watching the bottom right there, one button push and corn's flowing into a truck. That's the future of mobile right there. We can totally change somebody's life related to this. So they were able to do it with half the people, keep the driver safe and dry in bad weather, and they were able to get 20% more trucks on the road. Those are the places where mobility, the Knotek environment, totally changes what we're going to be able to do as a society. So that's the stuff, again, It's really easy to come up with the interesting web link. These are the really powerful examples. Anything in the world with a motor in it can be mobile enabled. Think about that. Every manufacturing facility, every vehicle, anything out there, we can start looking at where would it make sense or how would this make somebody's life easier if they had mobile access to control this thing. So I think that's huge. We talked a little bit about some of the streaming video. This is an example for Stanley Black & Decker. They had an existing back-end system. It was a web-based system that allowed middle-level managers, so back to the who's their target user, it's middle-level manager, to actually look at the security incidents for a couple of hundred facilities. So this isn't the tool for the security guard who needs to actually handle that day-to-day security. This is, you know what, I need to manage a lot of information, make it easy for me to see what happened, pull up recorded video or live video if I need to, but focus that functionality on who I am. And a great example here of doing it on a couple of platforms. I talked a little bit earlier about the application from Lextech Labs, and we're going to try that same experiment here and see if my OS is going to have other challenges for us. So this is the most advanced mobile application in the world. There's a lot of intelligence into this to make it look like it's nothing. What this is doing is pulling real-time streaming video from all over the world, encrypted, optimizing that transmission so that what I'm seeing is what's actually happening right now. So this is in use today by Department of Justice federal agencies to catch the bad guys in the middle of doing what they're not supposed to be doing and getting in there and stopping it. It's in use today by the campus police so that they're able to extend their reach to actually keep people safe or to do mobile investigations. So I'll give you a quick example here. So yes, real-time video wall. Swipe across and I'm bringing in the next 20 feeds. So whether it's iPad, iPhone, BlackBerry, put easy-to-use capabilities in the hands of the people who need it, because this isn't geeks. This is police officers. They're not in front of a computer. They're out working in the real world. So let's look at a camera hanging on a roof up in Naperville, Illinois. And I'm just going to double tap on the screen here and control that camera. And zoom that camera in and out. That's the power of mobile. Again, that thing's got motors in it. It's got real-time data feeds. That's no different than me tapping into a real-time stock stream and putting real-time visualization of what's happening in the real world. It's the exact same thing. So we can do, all the stuff that we see on TV, 24 and otherwise, is low-tech compared to what we can do. So we need to get to that point where we actually believe that. We absolutely can. And in this particular case, I'll show you the example. So I can do mobile investigations with this. So I'm actually rewinding that live video on the left side while I'm watching the live video and still controlling it on the right side. Again, that's just a mobile platform. In a lot of cases, I can't do this on a desktop today. But because you're able to approach this from a, what's this person need to do? They need to do a couple of really focused things. You can do those things better than you can on a desktop because that's all you're doing. Do it really well and make it easy. So this is one, as you can tell, I'm a little passionate about. It's launched this company about 3 years ago. And it's doing good in the real world. And I think that's really, really cool. If anybody's got any more detailed questions about that, I'd be happy to show you a more detailed version of it later. And then the last example we're going to run through is how do mobile devices pull people together. So this is an example that you may have seen if you've ever attended a trade show, is every trade show out there now has their own mobile app to show you the show floor and where the bathrooms are, you know, the critical information. This particular organization went beyond just the application for the attendees. They went and put applications together so that the exhibitors, the people in the booths, if you haven't seen it, they typically have little hardware scanners, probably not much bigger than this, where they ask, can I scan your badge? And they're laser scanning your badge so that they can collect your information to know who you were so that they can forget to follow up with you later. And that's exactly what happens in that industry. The data gets collected and then they don't use it. because it's not easy. It ends up in a big spreadsheet somewhere back in somebody's hands. I can't remember if I talked to you or the other person. I remember we talked about something and I don't know what it was. Make it easy. So what this application actually does is before the show makes it easy for me, the person who's attending, to say, you know what, I really want to talk to this company about something. Through the application, I can actually schedule appointments. And through push notifications and other messaging, link these two human beings together using the mobile apps. Let them schedule the appointments, get it on their calendars, but start that whole relationship building with the app. Then when I'm at the show, I can actually look at my schedule, understand where I'm supposed to be when, facilitate all that information. The exhibitor knows who I am, can ask me questions, survey questions or otherwise. Pick, you know what, okay, this person needs these pieces of literature. Tap, 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 record, done. They've got PDFs waiting for them when they get back to the office or wherever they were from. So facilitate bringing those people together. That's the other power of mobile that is really underutilized today, because we keep focusing on my interaction with the device, not my interaction with you. How is the mobile device helping us communicate better? How is it bringing us together? And I'm not just talking about the Facebook side of things. How is it bringing the right people together to have the right kind of discussion? So having, and especially push notifications to bring a user back into the application, huge value. And now we're going to rapid fire through 10 opportunities that really show you there should be an app for that. And they're very simple, and I've actually got there's an ebook at the end of this. If anybody wants it, just let me know, email you a copy. So these are the 10 things that if you see these specific indicators, there should be an app for that. The first is anywhere in an organization where you see a clipboard, that should be an app. It's data collection. A clipboard or a binder is mobile paper. That doesn't make sense anymore. Let's get the app in there to actually collect that data more accurately and potentially prompt the user with questions that, oh, you put down that you used a pump on that job. Did you use a hose and any chemicals with it either? Make it easy for me. Number 2 is data double take. When does someone write something down? In this case, we're showing a waiter. When does anybody write something down on a piece of paper, a card, or otherwise, that within the next 30 minutes, somebody else types into a computer? That's a specific example that, to start with, an easy-to-use mobile interface would have been enough to actually capture it all directly in, validate it, and speed up the whole process. We touched on this a little bit earlier, but where in an organization is there specialized hardware today? So point-of-sale systems, gone. Mobile devices are going to replace them all in the next 5 to 10 years. Well, what else? Warehouses today, they've got lots of really expensive mobile gadgets. I mean, really expensive mobile gadgets on proprietary RF networks to go around and laser scan everything in that warehouse. You know what? We can do all that with phones today. Now, yes, we need long-distance laser scanners and stuff like that, but we can just hook that to this mobile computing platform we have. Those are going to get replaced. Where else is there specialized hardware that instead mobile apps on a standard platform can replace? Great place for apps to exist. Now, we touched on this a little bit earlier as well in terms of where in an organization is there money being lost because there's incomplete information. The chances are that incomplete information is coming from an interaction between two people. I'm asking questions, but I forgot to take down half of the answers. Well, if instead there's an app that's actually helping with that data collection, I'm not going to miss anything. The original driver for that Lextech Labs video surveillance application was the fact that, as you see on the left side, there are billions and billions of dollars of video cameras, video recording systems, and infrastructure worldwide. And almost nobody has access to it. It's recorded for the most part and forgotten about. The people who could make use of that information, and we're showing here a lot of folks in law enforcement, but it could be executives. It could be an operations manager that, you know what, if they had a camera pointed at their assembly line, they could actually check on problems when they were out of the office. These two things aren't linked. So any information that is locked away that only a small subset of people have access to, we talked about it, that's what mainframes used to be. Information locked away means there should be an application to enable other people actually being able to get to it. And this is the obvious one. Anytime someone is using a VPN to connect into a company system for something, 95% of the time, they're not running really sophisticated applications. They're just trying to get to one thing that they need to answer. So I'm not talking about the person who needs to live on a VPN 10 hours a day. I just need an answer. I need to go look up this thing, but I got to connect to the VPN. Well, if I'm connecting via VPN, I could probably use an app instead to get to the information I want. Do it over a secure connection and let me do it way faster. Mobile web, and we can debate a little bit more on the technology one way or the other, but it's a great indicator if an organization looks at your existing website log files. How are people hitting our website? If we're seeing a lot of mobile users, iOS, Android, BlackBerry, other, if we've got a good percentage of those users, we probably need to look at, number one, what part of our web system are they using, because that should be an app. But the fact that if there are 10, 20, 30% of our users are coming in on a mobile platform, those people want a mobile app from us. They want to get into that functionality quickly. We saw with one association that we were working with that we sat down with them. They brought up their website stats while we were talking with them, and they found that over 50% of their users were coming in from mobile devices, and they had no idea. Immediately, that totally changed their go-to-market in terms of how they were supporting people in the field, because they had been all web and thought that, man, we'll get to mobile eventually. Half of the people who were coming to them for information were already on mobile, and it was only going to grow. So that really made it easy to understand that they needed an app. Folks may have seen those the snazzy kiosks in the Apple stores, the little self-service iPads. Anywhere today where there's something that's a self-service or a kiosk, there probably should be an app, because why are you making me walk over there to that thing instead of letting me get to it from home? I want the same interface. I want the same data. Why do I have to come here? Give me a mobile app to do that. And a great example would be car dealers. You're dropping that car off. There are some folks that have had very advanced kind of check-in systems where I can go over to that kiosk and type some things in and get information. Well, that's kind of cool, but once I leave that, I have no idea what's going on. Why? That's an app that should be with me the whole time and tell me everything about the whole process as I'm going through the service. So bring it to me instead of making me go to it. Something that really happens on a regular basis with salespeople or folks in the field is that they have to, when they're talking to somebody, say, hold on, pick up a phone and actually call someone for more information. So this is kind of the outside sales, inside sales dichotomy, if anybody's familiar with that world. If I have to stop and actually pick up a phone to go call somebody who knows more than me about a particular issue, I probably need an app that gives me that data. So it could be, do we have any of the red cakes in stock? Or it could be other things that I need to know about something. So if I have to call someone for information, there should be an app for that. And then the one that I am most passionate about, because I'm a big believer that one of the things that sets us apart as a society is how we help other people. And specifically, whether that's a sales context or whether I'm helping someone. If I have to turn my back on you to walk away and go get information, that shouldn't have to happen. If it's in a sales context, I probably just lost the sale. If it's in this case, a healthcare context, as this particular picture, this is the room that doctors had to go to actually look up patient records. They had to leave the patient, walk to one special room to get to they had all of it electronically in one room. That didn't help. Instead, if while I'm at, and I'm guessing folks have seen this at your dentist, at your doctor, they've got the computer terminal there, but the chances are the way they have that room laid out, they have to turn their back to you so that they can enter their data in the screen, and they're not looking at you or interacting with you at all while they're doing it. Instead, similar to those metal claps we talked about before, if that's all right here, and as that doctor, as that salesperson, I'm able to use this to communicate between the two of us, there needs to be an app for that. So, something I'm really passionate about. Again, if anybody would like a little more detail on any of those 10, there's an ebook available on lextech.com, or let me know and I'll shoot you an email of it. So summarizing. I know that was a lot of material. That was the fire hose. But that's important, because mobile is way different than web, and we've got to understand that, especially the richness of the interface, and the fact that we've got to solve very focused, targeted problems with those apps that we're doing. And we need to start differently to say, you know what? What's the problem we're really trying to solve, and focus in on that. Now, in the web, we can kind of hide. because we can go bloatware, we can make something that's bigger and cover all of those different things for a lot of people. On mobile, we can't hide. We are right out there. And if we're not addressing the user's needs in an easy-to-use fashion, that's going to come up really quick, and we're going to run into problems. So that's the overall run-through for things, and I would be happy to answer any detailed questions, tech, business, or otherwise, to help you guys out. Yes? So the question comes down to that data today that's locked away exists in lots of different back-end systems. And if I can paraphrase, it's hard to get to. I call those systems crusty back-end systems. They're hard to get to. They're hard to talk to. They don't have a service-oriented architecture. They don't have web services. They probably don't even have a web interface. So pulling data from them is hard. So number one, if they've already got web interfaces, they've started solving some of those problems. But they probably solved them for this much bigger web interface. So even if they have web services, it's going to give you the 100 data elements instead of the 4 you wanted. So number one, if you're lucky enough to be working with an organization that has a good team working on web services and back-end technologies, they're probably already thinking about the problem of, you know what, we need to unify this data and bring it together. And that's a hard problem. It really is. But I thank you for the validation, because that's exactly why I started Serious Apps. It's specifically aggregating data into a single source that's easy for mobile interfaces to access is hard. And we're going to be rolling out a SaaS offering ourselves in January to address that problem, because it is hard. And actually, and thank you. So the point that a lot of this data doesn't live in databases, it lives in spreadsheets, is absolutely indicative of the real world. Now, that should give us all the heebie-jeebies, but it exists that way. The marketing person's got the spreadsheet that's talking about the latest promotion. Somebody in sales has the spreadsheet. It's all spreadsheets or Access databases, maybe. Nobody else has the information other than via email. So again, how do we make it easy to take the spreadsheet and suck that into a system via a simple web interface, and suddenly it's queryable and aggregatable? Yes. So beyond the stuff that we're doing, that is a problem that the world is finally, I think, seeing. And we're going to see some more solutions in the next year. It has to happen. Because you can't build successful systems when you can't pull the data. Yep. Thank you. Other questions? Yes? So the concept of a different app per feature. So clarifying that a little bit, if the features are tightly integrated together, that can be a single app. If that app is letting me do 5 or 10 different things, then we need to come up with a different way to communicate that. And in that case, yes, it really should be multiple apps. The concept of a dashboard with a bazillion things in it, that's very difficult to navigate. So from a banking application, the idea that, you know what, I can make my deposit, I can look up my balance, and maybe one other thing, that's really about the extent the app should have in it, because that's 99% of what people are going to use it for. So it's very hard. So looking at a banking website, for example, taking that and shoehorning it down to the 20% of features that are important, that's easy. Getting 20% down to the 5% we really need, that's really hard. Politics come in, marketing and sales come in. What's most important to people? So it's hard, but we really need to do it, because the most successful apps are the ones that are focused. Yes? So how did these big companies kind of get started with it, and did they approach us, or did we approach them?
Yeah, the software companies or
So in terms of how the discussion with big companies and folks helping build applications has really typically started, we've tried to position ourselves as thought leaders. I do a lot of discussions like this and really trying to educate, and typically the folks in the audience, one of the things that excites me about this is that I'm a geek, so I love talking with folks who are on the technical side. I spend a lot of time working with CIOs, operations folks, or otherwise, to help them understand mobility. And one of the reasons that it's a real challenge is that unlike the internet hit companies, and it was really difficult, but they were able to manage it because they kind of had 6 to 7 years. Mobility has hit those same companies, and they're behind, and they haven't even started yet. So that tech curve hit them in like 2 years, so they're behind. So they're, number one, right now really frightened, and they're looking for people that help them think it through and build it. And that's really where we try to focus, is doing all of that, not just the building. So are you looking to build apps for other folks? So how to help somebody get through their fear, or even to convince them that they should be doing mobile. Right now, again, from anybody who's looking to write your own apps to take to market, or having your own consulting company or otherwise, there is a huge opportunity to help people build things in the mobile space. If you're talking to someone that's not sure if they should do mobile and they need to know a lot more about it, move on. They're the wrong company, because they're spending your time educating people when there are so many people just dying for your help. It's not worth it. In a traditional technology market, then I would say, yes, you need to educate them and work with them. There's an awful lot of people that want help today that will just raise their hand saying, please help me. They know that's where they need to go, and that those are the right people to work with. Yep. And I think maybe we have time for one last question. Yes? Definitely. So privacy and security are another two of the areas that are extremely important, and in some cases fuzzy in terms of what the requirements are. From a technical perspective, we can address a lot of that with encryption and really rolling things out in that way. Depending on the specific application and the specific data set, the medical imagery and the HIPAA requirements is a perfect example of that data can't be resident on the device. So it can't actually hit the device. So we have to be conscious of that when we architect the whole thing. Well, if it can't hit the device, well, then that means we're really going to need a live connection that's high enough bandwidth that we can actually work with it. If it is hitting the device, in some cases, Department of Justice-wise, that actually is okay, as long as we encrypt the heck out of it following the proper standards when it's on the device, and the device is remotely wipeable through a separate authentication scheme. So there's unfortunately no one answer to it, because it depends on the standard you're trying to adhere to and what levels of encryption you need. But absolutely a real problem and worth knowing about. Well, thanks, everyone. Appreciate you having me here today. And if anybody would like more detail, let me know.